You call 911 in an emergency, you expect someone to show up. In the early parts of the COVID-19 pandemic, first responders were applauded by the public, going out and doing the work while most of the country stayed at home.
Yeah, but one segment of those first responders, arguably the most important during a health crisis like COVID-19, aren't technically considered an essential service in Massachusetts, emergency medical services, or EMS.
Those who work in EMS say the pandemic only exacerbated the existing problems within the field. Western Mass News reporter Audrey Russo has the details.
911 is one of the first phone numbers we learn. Dialing the numbers, hearing the siren, seeing the flashing lights means help is on the way.
But if you're calling for a medical emergency in Massachusetts, the type of response you get may vary depending on where you live. Officials with the State Department of Public Health confirmed to Western Mass News that Massachusetts doesn't consider EMS, or emergency medical services, to be an essential service the way they do with police and fire. That means towns aren't required to provide them. Now, most do, but the ambulance service that shows up in your driveway may be different from town to city to town.
Fire-based EMS services. We have private ambulance services.
Deborah Clapp is the executive director of Western Mass Emergency Medical Services. It's a nonprofit designated by the state to help coordinate EMS in the state's 4 western counties, whether towns choose to run their own ambulances or go with a private company. Though Massachusetts doesn't consider EMS essential, ambulance agencies that do exist must follow the state's rules and regulations for operation. That's where Clapp steps in, providing technical assistance to each ambulance service, helping each first responder stay up to date on their certifications, and making sure each agency is following state mandates. Clapp and just one other employee do all of that oversight for more than 55 different ambulance services.
We went from 4 to 2 people over the last number of years because of the budget cuts, and that has really hampered our ability to provide the kind of services that not only are necessary but are required.
Her work is funded by the legislature and administered through the State Department of Public Health. But Clapp isn't the only one who's overwhelmed. Just take it from those who actually do the work.
They're not coming out in droves to do it anymore.
EMTs and paramedics say they're seeing a mass exodus from the EMS field, especially from private ambulance services.
You have to put in overtime all the time just to cover those minimal expenses. Lots of people are transitioning towards municipalities or just getting out.
There's a definite shortage right now of people that are going to school and passing the test.
And then the COVID-19 pandemic turned the cut into a gaping wound.
We are experiencing staffing shortages, funding shortages. People are scrambling to maintain the level of service that's required of them.
Combine lack of workers with low wages and an oversight system that's basically a skeleton crew of 2 people. Those in the field say it won't take much to ignite the system that's running on fumes.
What happens if there's a disaster of some sort? And a disaster doesn't need to be very big in Western Massachusetts. We need all these logistics to be able to step into place and handle these events. And meanwhile, 911 is still being called for the heart attack, the baby being born, the car crash. We have one trauma center here in Western Massachusetts, one level 1 trauma center.
It's placing worry on the shoulders of those who need to be able to act quickly and unencumbered to save lives.
We've had some bad days, and that's what we're here for, to help fix that, to help prevent that from happening. But it's very frustrating.
It sounds like this is a little tough to talk about.
It is.
A lot of worry for a service that the state doesn't consider essential.
People don't think about EMS until they need an ambulance or until they see one going by them.
Great, thanks for the thoughts and prayers and the pizza, but no, you need a livable wage.
For Western Mass News, I'm Audrey Russo.
Massachusetts confirmed to Western Mass News that emergency medical services aren't considered essential services in the way that fire and police are.
Most towns still provide them, but what happens when you dial 911? How long does it take for them to arrive? Western Mass News reporter Audrey Russo has part 2 of our series on the problems the local EMS community is facing.
The amount of time that passes between dialing 911 and having an ambulance arrive in your driveway is critical in a medical emergency.
The standard that most people in the industry have gone by is an 8-minute response time in an urban system.
Brian Andrews is a board member for the Massachusetts Ambulance Association, a trade organization for private EMS companies. Western Mass News obtained through public records requests response times from the state for several different ambulance services, both public and private, for the first 6 months of 2021. Longmeadow Fire Department, a public ambulance service, had a median response time that hovered around 8 minutes. Action Ambulance, a private company serving Holyoke, had a median response time of 7 minutes. These municipalities have similar population densities. We also looked into the private ambulance company serving Springfield, which has a much larger population. National Ambulance Service hovered between 11 and 13 minutes per response. American Medical Response, or AMR, 10 minutes per call. Comparing those numbers to another city with a similar population density, we also requested response times from a private company in Worcester, MedStar, who averaged between 10 and 12 minutes per call during the same period. Andrew says there are many factors that can affect response times.
The size of the service, the volume of the calls.
But one of the biggest factors, Andrew says, is that people just don't want EMS jobs.
Our industry is in crisis. If you truly believe the patient is having a cardiac arrest, no, I don't think that we would want to settle for 13 minutes. But I think unless something changes drastically in our systems with this staffing problem, that's going to become, more norm.
We reached out to AMR. They say EMS workers already working during a staffing shortage are having a tougher time passing patients off to understaffed emergency rooms. An AMR spokesperson says in part, quote, "There are just frankly no available stretchers, or there are no staff members to accept the patient. And the patient is being managed essentially on a stretcher outside the hospital, waiting to get in." We also reached out to National Ambulance, which did not return multiple calls. Both private and public ambulance services are affected by the EMS staffing shortage.
Right now, outside of a municipal service, it's kind of a disaster. These private ambulance companies mainly rely on paramedics and EMTs that are coming from a fire department to work part-time or per diem.
James Pijar works as a paramedic for a municipal service now, but he used to work for private ambulance companies. He says because of the staffing issues and the fact that many per diem workers don't want certain shifts,
You pretty much hope that you don't have a medical emergency on a night, weekend, or holiday, because odds are that ambulance company is going to be functioning at a bare bones minimum staffing.
We had guys who were on the job 20 plus years. Now the longevity just really isn't there.
John David Hebert is an EMT. He used to work for a private ambulance service. He too transitioned to a municipal one.
The more feasible services are the ones that can regionalize.
So we went and spoke to one of those services that did regionalize.
We cover the towns of Deerfield, Sunderland, and Whately.
The chief of South County EMS, Zachary Smith, says a few years ago, the 3 towns decided to fund a public service rather than rely on their dwindling volunteers or a private company.
The community has said this is something we value that is worth spending money on.
The main source of revenue for a private ambulance company is billing patients and insurance, something that Andrews, who works for a private service, says has grown increasingly difficult through the years.
60+% of our income comes from Medicare and Medicaid. The reimbursement rates have not kept up with that. And so, that's kind of stagnated salaries.
When you start trying to get cute with the numbers, usually the first place that takes a hit are the people that you're relying on to be those care providers.
For Western Mass News, I'm Audrey Russo.
Gun violence is spiking across the U.S., with rates not only climbing nationally, but also right here in Western Mass.
Western Mass News reporter Lindsay Kane is digging deeper into gun violence rates in our area and getting answers from one local mother on what needs to be done to stop the violence.
It's rough. It's rough. I have all my children, my husband. We just cling together. We have to try to make it through this. It's rough.
For the Starks family, not a day goes by where they don't imagine Camry coming home, walking through the front door, smiling from ear to ear.
My heart is broken. You know, I miss him bouncing through the house. Hi, Mom. Upstairs, sees Dad. You know, see you later. If you need me, call me.
Those memories now serve to describe just how family-oriented Camry once was. He was one of 11 children, the youngest of the 7 boys. His mother, Irene, speaking exclusively to Western Mass News, around 7 months after her 26-year-old son was shot and killed. Not only did Camry leave behind his family, but also 2 young daughters, one who was just born a few months ago.
My grandbaby's never going to know, well, she'll know what he sounded like through video. She'll know what he looked like through pictures. However, she will never know him.
Police tell Western Mass News Camry was first shot down the road on Shawmut Street as he was driving. He drove up further on the street and eventually crashed right around this area. Police say more than 36 shell casings were found on Shawmut Street.
He was the baby boy. That is like a stab. And this is a stab that's hurtful and it's never going to go away, I understand, until they find out what happened or who did it.
Irene tells Western Mass News there are very little leads into who killed her son, although police do believe Camry was targeted. He was arrested in 2016, but his family says that only serves as a milestone to show how far he had come since then.
He did get in trouble, but when he got out of that trouble, he was on a mission. You know, 2 beautiful daughters, and he was trying to make it work. He was on the road, straight and narrow.
Gun violence in the city of Springfield has been on the rise for the past 2 years, as well as across the nation, claiming the lives of too many to count and, like the Stark family, leaving other families with a hole that can't be fixed. So far this year, Springfield police officers responded to more than 400 calls for shots fired. There have been more than 80 reported shootings with at least 1 victim this year alone. In 2020, police seized a record of 275 illegal firearms and well over 200 already this year. It's a problem spokesperson for the Springfield Police Department, Ryan Walsh, tells Western Mass News is only growing.
Those numbers are just things we've never seen before. So our officers are as proactive as possible. The commissioner has created a unit, our firearms investigation unit, just to go after some of these illegally possessed firearms and try to prevent some of these shootings.
He says the gun violence problem is worsened in the city by shootings that could have been prevented.
A lot of times these individuals who are arrested for murders have been arrested before for shootings or having guns on them, and some of that can be prevented if we can kind of stick to what the state has for some of these mandatory gun laws once somebody's convicted of a firearms charge.
Hamden District Attorney Anthony Gallouni tells Western Mass News this problem is being tackled head-on by different task forces assigned to help stop gun-related crimes.
Those are seasonal issues, they're circumstantial issues. You know, one of the things that we've done as an office to address the needs of public safety across this county is to really be dynamic and really focus on our most violent offenders.
He says working to keep known street threats behind bars helps keep overall shooting rates down, especially those that are gang-related.
We're focused on those individuals who, again, are committed to violence. If we get them off the streets, their leadership, so to speak, the fact that they drive violence really makes an impact on community safety.
But for Irene, seeing the impact of gun violence strikes a different chord, one many are lucky to not understand.
When it happens to you, it's hurtful. It's hurtful.
She says she is now Camry's voice, and she wants to help others locally and across the nation realize guns are not the answer before more lives are lost and more families suffer.
They've got to stop. All around America, they've got to stop. They've got to stop and think, because they're not thinking.
For the Starks family, their life will never be the same, but they look forward to the day they will feel a sense of closure, seeing Camry's killer behind bars.
Until then, all we can do is pray, and I have faith.
In Springfield, Lindsay Kane, Western Mass News.